Hi, I'm Yakov Horowitz, and I wanted to just have a follow-up conversation about mental wellness as it relates to the three-day yontif and the possibility of what many of our Gedolei Poskim have discussed in terms of the obligation that if one is dealing with mental wellness issues, anxiety, depression, or any other mental wellness issue, or someone is in recovery and from addiction and needs to talk to a sponsor or go to participate in a meeting for their wellness, that we have an obligation to do what one has to in order to survive and to chai behem. The life is above all. Rav Hershel Shechter Shlita, Rav David Cohen Shlita have put out the beautiful videos and psakim about all of this. And the question that keeps coming up, many people have asked me over the past couple of days, and especially today, how do I know at what point? I wrote "How bad is too bad," meaning at what point the sensitive, thoughtful people for whom not keeping all of the mitzvahs, the commandments of Shabbos and Yontif is not an easy thing to do. And they're asking in all sincerity, like, at what point do I know? How do I know at what point to do what I have to remain healthy? A second question was how to think about it in terms of Hashkafa, which I'll talk about. And third point is I really would like to have an honest discussion with parents and loved ones of someone who is in that position. So to begin with, speaking to to people themselves who are questioning whether or not they should Yontif or the Shabbos is superseded by their wellness. It's really your own call. No one can tell you at what point this is, especially with a wellness issue, which is not that clear. Maybe recovery is perhaps a little more simple. Either you need a meeting or you don't need a meeting. You speak to your sponsor. But let me just give a few categories from what I've heard directly over 25 years, speaking to our leading Poskim and Gedolim about this. First of all, a mental wellness issue is treated exactly the same as halacha as a physical wellness. If someone is physical life is in danger due to illness, mental wellness issues are treated exactly the same. It's not like a lighter version of it. It's exactly the same. Achal nefesh is certainly in that same category. And if someone, that's number one. Number two, if it's a question, we do what we have to. Think of calling Hatzalah. Nobody calls. You don't wait to call Hatzalah until someone is on the verge of death. We call Hatzalah when we have a question of whether or not this is pikuach nefesh. So certainly the obligation is to treat a suffix, a question, with the full weight of when you would call Hatzalah. I think that's a good way to think about it, to call an ambulance corps. As Rav David Cohen said on the video, if time is not a factor, one should try to do things with a shinui a little bit differently. But I just spoke to Rabbi Avi Khan, who's a dayan and a rav here, and he followed up with Rabbi David Cohen on the video that Amudim made, and I asked him for some guidelines, and he said something very profound. He said that if for example, if someone is in recovery, and they have a phone call to make, let's say at 3:00 to a sponsor, and it's 2:55. So they certainly should do a shinoi. Shinoi means something differently than it's normally done. So if you normally dial a phone with your left hand or right hand, so use the other hand, or do it with a knuckle, or in a different way, so that it becomes a derabanan. But if someone is in anxiety on the spot, Rabbi Avi said 100% the person should just pick up the phone and do what they have to immediately, because it's considered a chayil nefesh. Rav David Cohen also said something about the Brisker Rav, the great Brisker Rav, who was known to be very machmer on pikuach nefesh. His line was, what he said was, people would say, how come you makel, how come you're lenient on Hilchas Shabbos, on the rules of Shabbos? So he said, I'm not mekel on Shabbos. I'm not being lenient in terms of superseding the Shabbos for health. I'm machmir. I'm being stringent on pikuach nefesh. And that's also something to consider. And Reb David actually mentioned it on the video. I was trying to explain this to someone. I was having a conversation with a woman who's struggling with some of these issues. And I was trying to articulate it. I said something that she found helpful, and I'll share it with you. And Reb Moshe has the truth. If you want to look it up, it's Hilchos Arachayim Aleph Kuf Chav Tes 129. And Reb Moshe Feinstein Zatzal talks about at what point the same concept of Chilul Shabbos, and he discusses internal bruising, and he of many other things. One of the things he talks about is temperature. He generally says that without knowing why something is happening, a elevated temperature of 102 is already enough. Is considered a safek pikuach nefesh, and we have to do something about it to remediate it. So I told this woman, I said, think of your temperature, because what she was saying was, which is true, of course. She was taking it very seriously, of course. And she said, how do I know? So I said, think of it like your temperature. If you have 99.5 or 100, that means like you're feeling a little bit anxious. When your temperature starts rising and you start feeling anxious, you don't need to wait till you have 105. That was my point. She found it helpful in terms of quantifying it, perhaps. But think of it in those terms. Once things start getting elevated, unfortunately, we know with anxiety, and honestly, today everybody's anxious. So the additional anxiety certainly weighs heavily on people. So treat it as if it was elevated. Don't wait till it's too late, chas v'shalom, because sometimes the anxiety really has a life of its own, and it really could become dangerous. As far as Torah Hashkafa, as far as the theology, like how do we think about it? Two people asked me this, one yesterday and one today. Like, how am I supposed to think about this? I've never done this before. I've never had to violate the Shabbos, or have Shabbos superseded by Yontif, by health, and I said, your life matters. Hashem loves you. We value life above all. I heard something very profound from a very distinguished Rosh Yeshiva in Lakewood, who was talking about the need for social distancing, and he gave a beautiful talk that was on the internet about what we need to do to make sure that we, his context was about minyan or saying Kaddish or other things, encouraging people to stay home and stay alive. And he said something so profound. He said, why are people only worried about davening today and Pesach today? Why aren't they worried about keeping Pesach for another 30 years? Or saying Kaddish for the next 30 years? Meaning, if you're going to be irresponsible and not take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to say Kaddish a lot longer than just this one time. And that's how I encourage people to think about it. Another way that... Imagine if you worked for me in a summer camp. Okay, I was a head counselor for 7 summers, and you were an employee of the camp, and I was your supervisor, and you were out there, whatever, a counselor or performing in some capacity, and you weren't feeling well, and I'd come over and say, listen, please take the rest of the day off and rest up. And say, no, but I want to be with the kids. I'd say, do me a favor, I need you, I want you healthy, and I want you to be at full capacity. Please go home, go to your bunk, lie down, take care of yourself, go to the infirmary, and then I'll have you back at 100% for a long time. And that's how I think we should think about it. I mentioned on a previous video regarding the social distancing and halacha and davening, a very beautiful story that I heard from a friend of mine. Obviously, he was much older than I was, a Holocaust survivor. And he was telling me about the Rav in his city. He lived in Lithuania. And his Rav was beloved, and the town adored him and worshipped him and revered him. And he said that the rabbi, the Rav, one day on Shabbos, his daughter was ill, and he had to chop wood for a fire, so to make her well. And there was a forest behind the rabbi's house. And, that's what I would have done probably. Maybe you would have the same. Take an axe, put it under your jacket, walk to the forest, chop down a tree quickly so nobody should see you, and head back to the house and do what you have to do because the daughter was ill. And he said that this was his first. I asked him, we were just talking about Europe. This was his number one recollection. He left, he was deported when he was a preteen, but he remembered that so clearly and vividly. And what happened was the Rav got up, took his axe, and he went in front of his house with his Shabbos clothing on, and they had a special hat, the plushon hut that the Rabbanim wore when they were in official capacity, when they were, Masad Kedushin, when they were officiating at a wedding or giving a drasha in shul. He put on his finest clothing, and he was chopping down the tree in front of the house, singing a Shabbos song. And he was singing Zmiros. He was singing songs of Shabbos with Simcha, chopping down a tree. And the people in the town, this person told me as a child, like, everybody was talking about it. They thought he lost his mind. Like, what are you doing? And this was Shabbos afternoon. He came into shul for mincha, and between mincha and Mariv, he got up and he said, look, I know many of you saw me out doing in the street. He said, I didn't look at it like I was being machal Shabbos, like I was violating the Shabbos. He said, every Shabbos, I have what I'm supposed to do, the halachas, the laws that I'm supposed to do to keep Shabbos. This Shabbos, I had to keep Shabbos differently. He said, he didn't use this vernacular. He said, my boss told me to do things differently. He said that the Torah obligated me at this time to do what I had to do to save my daughter's life. And he said, if I'm doing that, why should I not do that with the same joy as I keep Shabbos? This is just a different way of keeping of doing what the Torah obligates me to do. And I beg everyone who, if you are struggling with depression or any other mental wellness issue, or if you need a meeting so that, God forbid, you don't fall off the wagon and regress into addiction, these are such important matters. Do what you have to. Do it, I don't know, b'simcha, you have to be on a certain level to do that. But don't do it with guilt, and don't do it with a heavy heart. Honestly, that'll probably make your anxiety worse. This is what the Torah wants you to do. The Torah wants you to be healthy and well for many, many more Shabbosos and many, many more Yom Tovim and many, many more years. And my final plea is a plea to parents and loved ones of someone who is struggling with one of these issues. I beg you, I plead with you, please allow your loved one, allow your child, let them follow their instincts. Please don't make them feel guilty, and tell them what I said here, please. I beg you, it's Erev Yantif, I don't want to say anything that's sad or depressing, but I've been involved in many cases where parents weren't feeling that way, and the results sometimes are tragic. So please support your children who are struggling. Support your children who are struggling with any wellness issue or an addiction, and encourage them to do what our Gedolei Paiskim told us to do, what our great rabbinic scholars suggested that we do, and what our Torah itself says to do, that we should do what we have to. Life supersedes all. And with best wishes for a wonderful Chag Hashav Sameach, for a good Yantif. May we be Zaycha to share Simcha and Nachas together, and everybody there who's struggling with wellness, please take good care of yourself. We need you. Klal Yisrael needs you for many years to come. Thank you. Good Yantif, everyone.